Thank you, everybody, for being here on a Friday right before the holidays. We're going to go over two officer-involved shootings today, as we typically do after every officer-involved shooting. Um, Chief Medina is going to talk a little bit about it before we go through the presentations. I do want to let you know they're very similar in a lot of ways, these two incidents, and then they're different in many ways. And I wanted to just warn everyone that obviously we can't get into tactics or what should have been done or what shouldn't be done, as with every OIS. So we'll do our best to answer questions, but it's just obviously this has to go through the process of the investigation. So with that, Chief Medina.
I want to thank everybody for being here today, and obviously we're going to be going over our two latest officer-involved shootings. And one of the things I want to talk about, though, is I want to talk about the announcement we made yesterday on how, we're going to be reviewing these as a whole, and it's a little different than in the past where we reviewed them individually. We purposely want to look at these as a whole and see how we could do things better, but we also want to look at what things officers are doing successfully in any of these incidents, and also look at the fact, were there any opportunities that we could have taken advantage of to use less lethal to ensure that we're doing everything we can to avoid a deadly force encounter. So these cases, along with all others, will be reviewed, and we're looking at that review occurring sometime in January. And with that, we'll just turn it over to Kyle, and we'll jump into these, and we'll take questions at the end. Thank you.
Hi guys, the first incident we're here to talk about is from November 25th, 2022 at 2204 Odessa Court Southwest. My name is Deputy Commander Kyle Hartsock. I'm with the Criminal Investigations Division, which helps oversee the multi-agency task force, which is responsible for doing the criminal investigations into officer-involved shootings. This critical incident community briefing will provide information about an adult son who was threatening his parents with knives, and when police arrived at the home, approached police with knives held up, resulting in an officer-involved shooting. You're about to see relevant video footage, police audio, and learn about other evidence and police procedures related to the case so you can have a better understanding of what occurred based on what we know right now. The Albuquerque Police Department conducts very thorough criminal and use of force investigations, which typically require investigators to interview multiple witnesses, review hours of video footage, and analyze a significant amount of forensic evidence. We're still at the very early stages of this investigation, which can often take several months to complete. Our understanding of this incident may change as the additional evidence is collected, analyzed, and reviewed. We also do not draw any conclusions about whether the officers acted consistent with our policies and the law until all the facts are known and the investigation is complete. A word of caution: the images and video may be disturbing. When police officers use force to arrest a subject or defend against an attack, it can be graphic and difficult to watch. In addition, there may be strong language by those shown in the video. Three officers who fired their weapons on this first incident are Officers Arnal Sampang, Officers Christopher Taradoni, and Jacob Muniz. Officer Sampang has been with the Albuquerque Police Department since 2015. He has no prior officer-involved shootings. At the time of the shooting, he was assigned to the Southwest Area Command. Officer Taradoni was hired in March of 2021. He has no prior officer-involved shootings, and at the time of the shooting, he was assigned to the Southwest Area Command. Officer Jacob Muniz was hired by the department in January of 2020. He has no prior officer-involved shootings. At the time of the shooting, he was assigned to the Southwest Area Command. All three officers are not currently in their active duty as they prepare to return to work. The person who was shot by police was 30-year-old Blaine Dinatelli. The incident we're here to talk about took place in the Southwest Area Command. On November 25th, around 3:21 p.m., an adult parent called 911 and stated that his adult son, Blaine, had been consuming alcohol for most of the day and was out of control. We're going to play for you now part of that 911 call.
Okay, what's happening? I need to know what's going on.
Right now, he started drinking earlier, and now he's just completely gone out of control.
What is he?
Calling us names, abusing us right now as elders.
Has he hit anybody?
Nope, got pretty close.
Does he live there?
Yes, he does.
During an over 20-minute long 911 call, the original caller's wife and the mother to Blaine also got on the phone. She indicates that Blaine is now armed with a knife and is attacking her husband while armed. We're going to play for you part of this 911 call.
They got into a fight.
I'm sorry?
They got into a fight.
They're in a fight? They're in a fist
They're
fight?
in a fight now. Yes.
Does he still have a knife?
I don't know. I'm not opening the door.
I told him not to talk to him.
Stop! What are you doing? What are you doing?
Did he
Oh my God.
tell me what happened? Ma'am,
Charged at him with a knife.
I told your husband to stay away from him.
You charged at him with a knife. Blaine
Without
charged at
saying
him
anything?
with a knife.
Okay. Is he stabbed?
No.
The officers had been advised prior to arriving that the subject was armed with a knife and that his mother was barricaded inside of a bedroom. As they approached the home, they saw the father near the front door and had him exit the house and talk to them. As they spoke to the father, Blaine emerged from the front door armed with 2 knives. The investigation revealed the officers were approximately 40 feet from Blaine as their command started for him to drop the knives. Verbal commands and threats of force were given for Blaine to drop the knives, but he did not, and Blaine started to move forward towards the officers with his knives held up. Officer Sampang fired a 40mm sponge, less than lethal round at Blaine from an approximate distance of 21 feet, which did hit him, but didn't cause Blaine to surrender. The officers continued their commands and began to retreat into the street, and when Blaine was approximately 13 feet away from them and still moving towards them, armed with knives, an officer-involved shooting occurred. Here's Officer Sampang's lapel video. He did fire his weapon during this incident.
Who else is inside? Hey, buddy, officer, what's on the police department? Over here. You okay? Hey, Mike, you drop the knife? Okay. Hey, you drop the knife? Hey, drop the knife! Drop the knife, buddy! Drop the knife! 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 Drop the knife!
Shots fired, shots fired. You guys good?
Good.
Sir.
Here's Officer Munoz, OBRD. He did fire his weapon during the incident.
Come top. Who else is inside?
Yeah, I can see him.
Hey, buddy, Officer Moose, Albuquerque Police Department. You okay? Hey, man, can you drop the knife? Hey, can you drop the knife? Hey, drop the knife! Drop the knife, buddy! Drop the knife! Drop the knife! Drop the knife! Drop the knife!
Shots fired, shots fired.
And here's Officer Tadoni's OBRD. He did also fire his weapon.
Clear.
Who else is inside? My wife. Okay. This is the room he's in. Okay. Can you come back here and talk to my other officers? He's right here. He's right in the living room. That's him. Okay, sir, come over here. Come over here.
Okay.
He's gonna help you. Hang on.
Hey, can you drop the knife?
7 knives, I think. Okay.
Hey, can you drop the knife?
Over there.
Hey, drop the knife! Drop the knife, buddy! Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife.
Drop it.
Drop the knife.
Shots fired.
Yes, good.
The object that that Blaine was holding at the time of the shooting were these two knives that were recovered from the sidewalk. These are closer photographs of the two knives he was holding in his hands at the time he was shot. A search warrant inside the home revealed several stab wounds into different property inside the home. Again, the person that was shot by police was 30-year-old Blaine Dinatelli. He was pronounced deceased at the scene. That's the end of this presentation. We'll go into the next one now. This incident happened on November 10th, 2022 at 401 Roma Avenue Northeast. This critical incident community briefing will provide information about a person who was trespassing on property involved in a recent felony, and when confronted by officers, armed himself with a bladed object, and an officer-involved shooting occurred. The two officers involved in this shooting are Officers Alex Couch and Chance Gore. Officer Couch has been with the department since August of 2020 and has not been involved in any previous officer-involved shootings. Officer Gore was also with the department since August of 2020 and also had no previous officer-involved shootings. As of today, both officers are back to their regular assignment in the Valley Area Command. The person who was shot by police was 41-year-old Jesus Alfredo Crosby. The incident that took place in the Valley Area Command. The incident that led to officer-involved shooting started on November 10th around 1:42 a.m. A non-sworn sergeant with our prisoner transport unit stopped Jesus Crosby on the property outside of the prisoner transport unit. The sergeant was familiar with Mr. Crosby from at least 4 prior encounters at the property of the prisoner transport center. The first incident was in early September, and Mr. Crosby was issued a written order to no longer trespass on the property. Mr. Crosby was arrested 3 times for violating that order between September 10th and October 19th. The PTC sergeant was aware of an incident also involving Mr. Crosby just 2 days prior, where a rock was thrown at a bank window across the street from the prisoner transport center. On November 10th, when the PTC sergeant recognized Mr. Crosby trespassing on the property, he asked for officers to assist in arresting him for trespassing. An officer leaving the prisoner transport center came to assist in trying to detain Mr. Crosby for violating the no trespass order. As the officer approached Mr. Crosby, he walked away from the PTC South and entered the open parking lot of the main police station on the east side of the building. The officer told Mr. Crosby he was not free to leave and that he was going to be detained. As the officer tried to physically detain Mr. Crosby, he lunged towards the officer with a plastic sharp object in his left hand and another object in his right hand. The officer believed it was a knife or another sharp object in both of his hands. Mr. Crosby was given dozens of commands to drop the objects and refused to do so, and started to walk further into the parking lot of the main police department. He came to rest near a wall as more officers arrived on scene. Mr. Crosby remained in an aggressive posture with objects in both his hands and his elbows and his hands raised slightly. He was given additional warnings that if he moved towards officers without dropping both objects, he would be shot. He did drop one of the objects, but not the other, and continued to not comply with the officer's commands. He made a sudden movement towards officers, and an officer-involved shooting occurred. During the shooting, at least one officer also fired their taser. Here's lapel video with the first responding officer's lapel.
Let me just talk. I'm Officer De Leon. I'm Officer De Leon, Albuquerque Police Department. Right now you're being detained and you're not free to leave. I'm dead, bro. Right now you're being detained and you're not free to leave. I'm dead, bro. Put your hands behind your back. Hey, swing on me. Put your hands behind your back. Right now. Put your hands behind your back. Put it down now. Put it down now. Put it down now. Put it down now or else you're going to be tased. Put down the knife. Put it down now or else you're going to be tased.
Officer Gore arrived on scene as the first officer was still trying to get Mr. Crosby to surrender. We're going to show you part of his video, and he does fire his weapon. This video takes place approximately about 3.5 minutes after the video we just played you.
Listen to it. Drop the knife. Drop the knife, man. Okay, still drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. That's it. Drop the knife right now. Drop the knife now. Look, you're dropping everything with the knife, man. Come on, just drop the knife. We don't want to have to do this. We don't want to have to do this. Put the knife down. Hey, Luke. You take one step, I'm gonna shoot you. Let's go with the knife. That's it. Drop the knife. We're taking medical distance until the knife is dropped. That's it. Now we're gonna step up. You have a knife. We're trying to do medical. Okay. Hey, who's got me? I got you. All right. You throw the knife in your hand.
Officer Couch also arrived on scene around the same time as Officer Gore, and he did fire his weapon. Here is his OBRD.
We don't want to have to do this. Put the knife down. Hey, you take one step, I'm going to shoot you. Let go of the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Now we're going to step up. Get the knife. Medical, okay? Hey, you got me. I got you.
In this still shot from another lapel video, just a couple minutes before the shooting, you can see the sharp object coming out of the right hand of Mr. Crosby. The object that Mr. Crosby was holding at the time of the shooting was identified as a pair of nail clippers with a sharp file piece extended out. Again, the person that was shot and killed by police that day was 41-year-old Jesus Alfredo Crosby of Albuquerque. He was pronounced deceased on scene. Over the next several months, the Albuquerque Police Department, for both of these shootings, will continue to investigate and analyze this incident. We will continue interviewing any new witnesses that come forward and complete any forensic test. After the investigation is complete, our Force Review Board will forward the findings to the Superintendent of Police Reform to determine if this incident met the high standards of the police department. The MATF will forward their case to the District Attorney's Office, who will make any determination of criminal charges. And at that point, we can try to answer any questions.
You want to, hold on, quick.
Oh, sorry.
So, go up and talk about the CIT.
Good morning, everybody. So Mr. Crosby was on our caseload at the time of this shooting. We had worked extensively trying to get him into services. So part of the Crisis Intervention Division's mission is to get people who have behavioral health issues, substance use issues, alcohol use issues into treatment. As part of this incident, Mr. Crosby was unhoused at the time, and so that makes everything more difficult. The case agent for this individual tried multiple times to locate him. You saw that he tended to go to the prisoner transport center. The reason why those individuals that work in that location knew about Mr. Crosby was because our detectives went out multiple times to try to get him into treatment. Unfortunately, every time we would go out, he had already left the area. We visited Mr. Crosby multiple times while he was in custody at MDC. Unfortunately, he was in medical seclusion both times that we went. This required officers to talk to him through metal doors at the jail, and honestly was not very effective. This case highlights the difficulty of interacting with people who are unhoused, with people who have mental illness, and the problems the system has for these individuals. Unfortunately, this case really kind of demonstrates how difficult it is for anyone doing case management, whether it's at the police department or anyone else in the city, or all the nonprofits. It's hard to keep track of people. And sometimes they end up in situations like this where the police have to respond. Lastly, I just want to say I hope that these events and similar events encourage all of us to work harder with the people who are unhoused to avoid these kinds of tragedies. That's all I have.
You know, and I think it's important to note that, you know, in both of these incidents, we did have ECIT officers on scene. We did have less lethal options, and I think that we all have to, as a community, grasp the fact that both of these processes may fail when we're dealing with live human interactions, or they may not have the outcome that we're hoping that both of them would be able to bring to a situation. You know, Mr. Crosby's case, like we talked about, is tragic in the sense that APD was working with this individual, trying to get this individual to the resources they need him. And I think this is why it's so important that we continue to work with all aspects of the community and all stakeholders in terms of mental health and getting those resources and developing a process and a system where we could have more successful outcomes, or we could have more productive interactions with these individuals as we process through these. And like Commander Dietzel said, this kind of highlights the reason why at times we need to make sure that, you know, as we're dealing with the unhoused population, that there is a sense of empathy with them, and that we realize that, you know, we got to work to get them help. And I know that a lot of times there's a lot of frustration in the community when they're confronted with these individuals, but this case spotlights why we need to continue to work as hard as possible to ensure that we're getting everybody the resources that they need. Questions?
Oh, go ahead. I was just gonna say, so in this case, the officers involved are back on duty. Can you explain how that works if the investigation is ongoing?
The investigation is ongoing, and that's typical how we do that. The officers are placed on a standard leave afterwards. Once they're cleared through a variety of processes, then they're returned to work. If at any time this became a point where it was believed the officers did anything criminal, obviously we would sit down and we would relook and see if anything needed to change.
And in the first case, the officers involved, they're still not returned to work, correct?
Have they, this second case, returned to work?
One of the cases.
You're still in the process of returning.
They're in the process. And I think we got to remember the first case actually occurred after the second case.
And I believe you might have answered this, but in both cases, were there crisis intervention team members on scene?
Both cases had ECIT officers on scene.
So you mentioned Mr. Crosby was suffering from a mental health crisis, which we didn't see on camera. Was he also under any substances at the time, like drugs or alcohol as well?
It's unknown. We're going to have to wait for the toxicologists to come back. You know, and that's one of the things we're hoping, that eventually at some point in time we could continue to work with the system, because we've seen that somebody being under the influence is so many times the case, but it takes us so long to get those reports, and sometimes the investigation has been completed and we're just waiting for those toxicologies, and they're added on to the investigation kind of after the fact. Yes, Elise.
In the second case, in the Crosby case, can you go over when the officer used the taser and when they used the gun, and was it the same officer? Did the same officer use the taser and the gun at the same time, or was that a different officer?
They were different officers, and it was nearly at the same time that they were used.
So one officer used the taser and two others used their guns.
Is that what it appears to be? Yes, at least one used a taser.
That's what we believe right now in the investigation.
Why didn't they all use their tasers? Like, why wasn't just less lethal?
You know, I think with the announcements we made yesterday, and even the conversation me and you had, is that's one of the things we're looking at to have an evaluation to see if there's opportunities to use certain objects earlier. And we're not going to know that until after we have this review of the 18 cases, and this case goes through FRB. That's one of the things we're looking for now, is was there earlier opportunities? So pending that review, it'd be premature for us to mention anything on that topic.
I took away from our conversation yesterday, though, that they could use less lethal if there's an active threat. And if this was an active threat enough for them to fire their guns, wouldn't it also be an active threat enough for them to use their tasers?
I think that's where the investigation is going to have to determine when certain actions took place. And I think that's where the investigation is going to clearly dictate when an individual is considered an active threat under the current policy, and any changes that we may make when that would be considered an active threat. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that's the whole point, is clarifying when the active threat actually is, and taking the totality of the situation into hand is something else we spoke about. You know, looking at the situation as a whole and seeing how we can make changes. Other questions?
I have a question about the other incident. Could the mobile crisis teams have been used in that case, or the community safety department?
The community safety department, I would say no. The individual was armed with a knife. I mean, you heard the concerns of even the dispatcher with the mother that, the son may have stabbed the father. And I believe that a mobile crisis team was requested, but there was not a mobile crisis team available at the time.
And kind of, again, kind of the same question. Like, I know they used the rubber bullet ahead of time, but as he was kind of charging at them, he's kind of like unsteady on his feet. He just doesn't look, could like less lethal have been used in that case again, rather than firing the guns?
And that's what the investigation will determine, how much time there was. Was it feasible for them to use less lethal again? And as you look at it, it unfolds rather quickly. So that's what the investigation is going to have to determine. And we find new stuff out all the time, and generally we don't hear about it. But even with the officer involved shooting on Tramway, just in the past couple of weeks, we realized a round was discharged from within the vehicle. So the investigation is still ongoing. New facts will become, and it will be looked at to see if they could have done anything differently. One of the positive, encouraging things I saw is the officers were backing up. They were trying to create more distance, but sometimes, no matter what we do, there's still going to be a different desired outcome that we would like, but we didn't get it.
I did talk to the parents in this case a couple days after the incident, and they had said that they'd previously called police, and police were kind of like, that he responded really well to the officers in the past, and they felt like that was something that they could do to kind of calm him down. But in this case, like, the officers didn't want to go inside, and they felt like he kind of went sideways. Could you address?
All that will be reviewed, and I think that if you yourself saw the video, Elise, and you saw that, it unfolded rather quickly, and, the officers were in the process of communicating with individuals, talking to individuals, and at no point in time would I want officers immediately to charge into a house. Because had our officers charged into the house immediately and ended up shooting individuals, the question that would be presented to me right now is, why didn't the officers slow things down, and why didn't they call everybody out, and why did they instigate this a little bit more? So it's one of those things that, there's always going to be questions. And the earlier calls, those will be evaluated, and it have to be individual. Each of these particular incidents are individual to themselves. I don't know what the weapons were in the past, and somewhere along one of the investigators will be able to tell you if the son was armed with weapons in the past and what their state was compared to this day. I know the father said that this individual had been drinking heavily. So, you have a combination of somebody going through a mental health crisis plus intoxicated. And I don't know what the circumstances are in the others. And each individual is each incident is so individual to itself that you may have, at a time when officers are able to talk to an individual because of the factors that were there that day. And there may be different factors on this one that it didn't, roll out the way that the parents had an expectation or that the officers hoped it rolled out.
Do you have any, the total of officer-involved shootings for this year alone, by chance?
18 officer-involved shootings,
Including these two?
including these two.
How many were fatal?
10? 10. I'd like to go and make sure I'm correct.
In the beginning, Gilbert kind of said that there's obviously some similarities and some differences in these two cases. I think we could draw our own conclusions, but what do you see as the similarities and differences of these two situations?
The difficulties of our officers having to deal with somebody and trying to work with somebody who's going through a mental health crisis, and the history that these individuals may have, and the realization that no matter what resources we have out there, whether in this case 2 ECIT officers, that we still may not get a successful outcome in terms of what we would hope these incidents to end with. So I think the similarity is dealing with mental health challenges, two very different situations, but the same individual mental health crisis, and the possibility of them being under the influence and that compounding the problem. And and there are differences. There's differences. One unfolded rather quickly. One went over several minutes where there was negotiation and people talking. So there are a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences.
you want to just talk about the closing of distance too? How the first one, some example of how quickly they close distance.
You know, it is. It's the first one is a great example of like how distance, how quickly distance can be closed, and the individual just, you know, in the first incident, there's always that concern when that first movement occurs that leads to officers reacting and using deadly force at the time. But in the second incident, I confused the two because of the time frame. But in the second incident, you see how, you know, the sudden movement is the point where officers discharge their firearms. But you look at the first incident, they discharge the taser, and you look at the ground the individual covers within seconds. And you can see how the officers are trying to back up as quickly as possible, but they could never tactically retreat safely fast enough as an individual coming straight at them. So distance is a big concern, and a lot of our training comes back to certain distances that once that distance is at a certain point, that officers would be able to assume that an individual could actually, and it's the old Tuller drill, an individual could actually stab an officer before they're able to draw their firearm and discharge their firearm. So distance has a big part of it, and some of these incidents unfold so quickly that it's difficult for officers to change or bring in new dimensions to the situation without due to the nature of time.
Just to be clear, the first incident is the November 25th
Yes.
one, and the second incident is the November
Yes,
25th one.
even though I confused them because of the time.
I'll say
The
on
dates.
the Odessa shooting, we know that the closest officer is about 13 feet away when they start using their firearm, which is about me to you. That's how close a person is with two knives moving towards them, as they're actually moving backwards. So the lapel videos can blow things out with the wide angle and make it look further, but it's actually about this close. So I think that's an important thing to kind of remember as we
And if you slow the video down on the first one, which is the second one, but if you slow the video down, you can see when the less lethal is discharged, and you could count the amount of time that goes between that person continuing to advance and the officers actually discharging their firearm. There is a good gap of a few seconds between that incident and the subject clearly continued his action towards them.
When do you think these cases are going to be reviewed by that group that you were talking about yesterday?
January 13th, Corey, right around January, mid-January, we're looking to get all the cases in front of the group, the executive staff and the city attorney's office, to take a look and see what we could do differently as a whole.
Will there be any kind of public report or briefing or any kind of like public thing from that?
Yes, there should be some findings that come out that will release to the public. And I think everybody here knows we've been extremely transparent. Like, we give these briefings and we intend to be transparent on any findings we have or improvements that we're looking to make based upon what the findings are.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Have a Merry Christmas.